Alright, what's up guys? Today I am doing the biggest video I've ever done. I am sorting every single booster pack that has ever come out in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It is easily going to be probably the longest video I've ever produced. Right off the bat, we have to lay down some ground rules. So if you don't see it yet, there are no special editions in this. I am not reviewing any gold stuff. I am not reviewing any Duel Devastator, nothing like that. There are no special editions whatsoever. It is just booster packs that come out of booster boxes. Also, a lot of the reprint sets I am not including because it'd just be a total waste of my time. As a matter of fact, generally speaking, reprints I am not counting. This is all I'm just reviewing the new releases. So for example, if there's like a set that has a ton of really good reprints, it's not even going to be counted. Reprints are not counted. It is mostly just new release cards. And because this is just such a huge tier list, I have to put some ground rules down. So I am reviewing these based on meta impact on the initial release of the product. So basically, how did the cards inside, how did they do when they came out? How good were they? What kind of meta impact did they have? And then the second ground rule that I have for sorting these things is what kind of meta impact did it have over the years? And of course, if a card is banned, obviously it had enough meta impact to be banned. That way, the older sets don't automatically go, like that way Magic Ruler doesn't automatically become a D tier set just because the majority of the card, a lot of the good cards are banned. Obviously, if a card is good enough to be banned, that means it's consistently having enough of a meta impact. So those are the two things. The consistent meta impact over the years, and then how good the set was on initial release. Those are the two big ground rules that I'm going to be doing for this set. So those are the two, that's kind of like the grading rubric. I don't care that there's a $40,000 PSA 10 Blue Eyes in here. That has no impact whatsoever on this tier list. This is just a competitive breakdown of these packs, nothing to do with collector's value. Maybe one day that's something we'll do, but as of right now, this is just solely based on the competitive impact of these cards. Secondly, I am going to be using TCG Player throughout this video. Like I said before, there's over 10,000 cards in these packs, easily over 10,000 cards, and there's just no way I'm going to remember every single card that goes in every single pack at any given time. I remember most of them, and that's fine, but at some point it's going to get foggy. I'm going to forget certain cards, and I'd rather try to give you as accurate a video as possible. So with that being said, let's get started. Like the video as always if you enjoyed it, and if you have other tier list ideas, definitely let me know in the comments. And if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. But let's get started. First, we have LOB. Like I said, let's move over to one of the greatest websites on earth, TCG Player, not sponsored, to do a quick review. So this set is actually interesting. It came out, and it's actually the first set, so it's tough for me to give you an impact of how good it, kind of how good it was when it came out, because technically it was the first product to ever come out. So automatically it is kind of like the best product to possibly come out, as far as, the product goes. So that's kind of a debatable point. But the monsters in this set actually were terrible. None of them were really usable at the beginning. Exodia was super inconsistent. Blue Eyes was sort of like the best kind of like power monster in the set. The actual best monster was actually Man-Eater Bug, of all things, because it lets you destroy your opponent's monster. Like I said, this wasn't really that strong of a set. Mystical Elf was actually half decent when it came out. Now, what was good about this set were the spells. The spells were actually broken. So you have things like Monster Reborn, and then you have things like Polymerization, Raigeki. Polymerization actually it was not good when it came out, but it did have a lasting meta impact, which is obviously important. It's still played today in Prank Kids and a variety of other fusion decks. Pot of Greed is easily a top 5 card ever printed, and it was just kind of like a rare in this set. Like I said, the monsters were really the area of the deck that was super duper lacking. Other than that, it was actually half decent. There's also a ton of these non-effect fusion monsters. They have been used throughout the years in decks that use instant fusion, and now that Ready Fusion came out, Ready Fusion, so they are probably going to come back to have a secondary impact. Swords of Revealing Light obviously has been on the limited list. Trap Hole, it was now has an entire archetype devoted to it. So overall, the set was actually, like I said, the monsters were weak, but the spells were really, really, really strong. And I would be wrong if I didn't mention this, but Blue Eyes, Red Eyes, and Dark Magician have all had uh, entire decks made out of them, and Blue Eyes actually did win a world championship later down the line. So, as far as long term competitive impact, cards like Pot of Greed, cards like Monster Reborn have been competitive for years. Raigeki was obviously competitive for years. It's not so competitive anymore. But Exodia also used to top in like the 2007s, 2008s, 2010s. It hasn't topped really in years because it's just very, very inconsistent. But overall, I'd say Legend of Blue Eyes is kind of like, in terms of compatibility, kind of a fair middle of the road set. When it came out, it was extremely, extremely boring. It was a kind of boring format. Yu-Gi-Oh really didn't pick up until the starter decks came out. We got some better effect monsters, some better traps, stuff like that. So honestly, Blue Eyes, Legend of Blue Eyes, I'd probably put right around B tier. I know it's sacrilegious to some of you, but I'd say that's probably where it belongs. So next we've got Metal Raiders. For Metal Raiders, this is another kind of interesting set. There's a lot of like collector's cards in here. So stuff like Gate Guardians, obviously unusable, but you had things like Summon Skull. This wasn't initially released in Metal Raiders, but because it was released in the starter deck, but honestly, this card had a huge meta impact. Same thing with Mirror Force. Mirror Force was huge. Whenever your opponent attacked, destroyed all their monsters. Huge impact. Solemn Judgment to this day is an extremely playable card. Change of Heart, if it was legal today, it would be played. A huge card back in the day. It was actually probably better back then because you could take not only face up but face down monsters, flip them, use your opponent's flip effects. Huge card in the game. Harpie Lady is another one of those legacy cards that has been turned into an archetype, and Harpies have actually gone on to be competitive throughout several formats of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just recently, it was actually a really, really good counter to Mystic Mind decks because they could just naturally out back row very, very easily. As for there, like I said, another issue is that there are still a lot of dead cards in Metal Raiders, stuff like just collector's cards, Thousand Dragon, Suijin, Kazijin. They did print a lot of cards in the show from these sets, so you have a lot of really, really weak cards. Heavy Storm was another huge one. Being able to pop your opponent's back row, but also your own, is actually better than just being able to pop your opponent's back row, because popping your back row can trigger certain graveyard effects. In addition to that, we have Thunder Dragon, one of the best commons ever printed in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's always a +1, gives you 2 lights, puts a light in grave. Super duper important for Chaos decks later down the line. Also has an archetype made after it. Sangan, Magician of Faith, 2 huge cards. Sangan, one of the most broken cards of all time, lets you search any monster below 1500. Magician of Faith lets you add back a spell. Huge, was actually banned for a long, long time. It was actually just unbanned a few years ago. People thought that being a flip effect, it would still be too broken to be played in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! But it did actually end up coming back. Sangan, it came back, but again, it has an errata. It'll never be the same. Witch of the Black Forest is an even better Sangan because it can search bigger monsters because it searches based on defense. So it can search stuff like Jinzo. It can search stuff like Summon Skull. It was actually, in a lot of ways, a lot better. It can search monsters basically that have low defense and high attack, and you can basically search any monster, any huge monster, basically with it. Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest are 2 cards that could, with their original effects, literally can never come back to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! They would be just too broken to ever come back. But I think that's pretty much it for the Metal Raiders here. Because the rest of the Metal Raiders cards are... We're now in the section of just decent cards, not so great cards. Actually, Cannon Soldier is a pretty usable card. And then we've got some more generic kind of like fusion monsters that could be used with Ready Fusion. A few more of these were okay, like 7-Colored Fish is just a good level 4 monster, Mass Sorcerer. Honestly, I think Metal Raiders is probably an A tier, just because it had a lot of really, really broken cards. A lot of the rares were actually really good. A lot of the rares were actually better than some of the super rares and stuff like that. Better than some of the super rares, ultra rares, secret rares, stuff like that. I definitely think it's an A tier at least. Next, we've got Spell Ruler or Magic Ruler. Magic Ruler is an easy one for me. I already know where this is going to go before I even before I fully evaluate it. But basically, it's this pack has the best spells of the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! There are so many banned cards in this set. Spells are probably generic spells are actually the best cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Period. Like there's nothing better than spells. Spells are the best because they have some of the, especially the early spells, have the most insane, like the most insane broken effects because they didn't have that much of an impact on the game back then. Like Delinquent Duo back then was not that big of a deal. Delinquent Duo today is huge because you can discard your opponent's hand traps. You can make them discard a card. It's huge to go -2 with Delinquent Duo. Back then, it wasn't really that big of a deal because you could recover, you have Pot of Greed, you had stuff like that. The game was a lot slower. Even if you got Delinquent Duo, it wouldn't be a big deal. But still, this set was absolutely insane. There are so many banned cards in this set. The best spells of all time are in this set. Like I said, Delinquent Duo lets you discard 2 of your opponent's cards. Snatch Steal lets you take your opponent's monster. Neither of these cards can really be unbanned. Mystical Space Typhoon was incredibly important. In certain ways, it was actually better than Heavy Storm or Harpie's Feather Duster, which came out in a video game. Because you could set it, your opponent could set a trap card on end phase. You can pop that trap card. You can respond to the activation of like equip spells and stuff like that. You could instantly deal with problems. Acts of Despair at the time was one of the better equip cards to ever come out. More of these. This is actually weird in certain regions. I think this came out in MRL. This was actually also the set where ritual monsters were debuted, and one of the best ritual monsters ever, Relinquished, was actually released in this set. Basically, it only requires a level 1 monster, so it wasn't as big of a cost as other ritual monsters. This set actually did have other rituals that were absolutely terrible, but this ritual monster was actually kind of good because it only took basically a spell, a level 1 monster, and then Relinquished. Then you activate it and you outed whatever your opponent had because nothing back then had any targeting protection of any kind. Also, Giant Trune was an absolutely broken card because you can activate things like Premature Burial, summon something back, activate Giant Trune, get it back to your hand, activate Premature Burial. Huge advantage. Probably can never come back. Forceful Sentry takes a card out of your opponent's hand. Confiscation takes a card out of your opponent's hand. Painful Choice is absolutely, hands down, the most broken card in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! There's not a single deck in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! That would not play Painful Choice if it was legal, right? And not a single one. Every single deck would play Painful Choice. You can use it as an upstart, you can use it as whatever. Seriously, it's absolutely insane. Now, the second page, Cyberjar, obviously one of the best flip effects. Upstart Goblin. I mean, literally, it just doesn't end. Like, we just keep scrolling through good cards. Banisher of Light is an insane card. Every card that leaves the field is banished. And that is pretty much it. The rest, I think, are just going to be just average cards. And even some of these average, like Shining Angel, actually did have a lot of competitive impact over the years. A lot of the destroyed by battle, or as they call them, recruiters, were released in this set. And Recruiter is basically a card that when it gets destroyed by battle summons another monster. You have Giant Rat, you have Mother Grizzly, you have Shining Angel. These cards would have meta impact literally for years, because anytime your opponent would destroy these monsters, you just bring in another one, you'd fill up your graveyard, and on top of filling up your graveyard, you would basically keep continuously accumulating advantage and protecting your life points while filling your graveyard. For years, they were very good up until they were kind of like phased out around like 2010 because they were just too slow. But yeah, huge competitive impact. This is probably one of the best sets of all time, so I definitely don't have any quarrels in putting it into S tier. Easily one of the best sets ever made. Next, we've got Pharaoh Servant. We've got a ton of really good cards. Jinzo, Thousand Eyes, 2 huge cards. Imperial Order is still, to this day, having a serious meta impact. I mean, seriously, Imperial Order is absolutely broken. Your opponent can activate a spell, and you can just flip Imperial Order, and they just go -1. They lose that spell. And then for the rest of the turn, they're just locked out of spells. Completely disgusting. I can't believe this card is still legal considering how good it is. Premature Burial, obviously a very good card. The Haunted. Nobleman of Crossout had competitive impact for years. It dropped off, it eventually dropped off because people just don't set monsters anymore, but for years it was actually very good. Obviously, we've got a ton of things like Ceasefire was on the ban list for a very long time. Easily one of the best burn cards to this day of all time. It flips all face down monsters, and their effects can't be activated, and then it burns your opponent for 500 for every face-up monster on the field. Still really good as a burn card. It was even better back then because obviously more people set stuff. Um, this set is not quite as deep as Magic Ruler. Magic Ruler is just absolutely insane. It just goes on and on and on with Magic Ruler. This set basically, as you can see here, it just has a really good first page. Gravity Bind actually had a lot of meta impact. If you're playing Exodia, obviously backup soldiers, stuff like that. But for the most part, this set is nowhere near as deep as... Had some really good cards like Jinzo and Thousand Eyes, but it's definitely nowhere near as deep as a set like Spell Ruler. Spell Ruler was just insane. It just went deep for a mile. So I think it's probably on par somewhere with Legend of Blue Eyes. Legend of Blue Eyes, I think, is just a little bit better because the spells are a little more insane. This definitely has better monsters than Legend of Blue Eyes, but that's not saying much. But yeah, still, that is so far what's going on there. Next, we've got Labyrinth of Nightmare. Labyrinth of Nightmare is kind of like in the middle-ish. Again, a lot of these early sets were really good because every single one of them had insane power cards. As the time would go on, a lot of them would sets would get a lot worse over time. We have sets regularly that come out and they have just no meta impact whatsoever. These old sets have always had meta impact. There were always powerful cards in these old sets. You always wanted to buy new ones. Stuff like Magic Cylinder, blocking attack, flipping it back at your opponent, Torrential Tribute, one of the greatest trap cards ever released, still used to this day. United We Stand, one of the best equip spells ever made. Jar of Greed, Card of Safe Return, one of the best draw cards ever made. Just because every time a monster special summon, you draw a card. It was used in the show. It was even more broken in the show, but it's still so broken in the real game that it's banned. Last Word from Another Planet, one of the best targets for Waking the Dragons, because neither player can summon anything, and you basically just keep attacking with this thing and you win. And then these are just kind of like the bread and butter monster stuff like Kaiko, Pazoo, Jowgen. Royal Command is good. It was good against a lot of empty jar decks at the time because all flip effect monsters are basically turned off. But this set is actually not quite as deep as some of the other sets that I've showed you. That first page had some decent cards, and we're already second page, and it's basically all pretty much nonsense from here going forward. The Spirit Messages unfortunately flopped because the problem with Spirit Messages is you want to continue to have face-up card. You want to have cards that prevent your opponent from attacking, stuff like Messenger of Peace, and if you keep filling your spell and trap card zones with Spirit Messages, you just can't stall your opponent, so it's actually counterproductive against itself. The Garuda, the Wind Spirit, some of the Wind Spirits, as you call it, the spirits came out in this, and I don't mean spirit monsters, but I mean this is the type of monster that lets you banish that attribute in the graveyard and then special summon it to the field. So for example, Aqua Spirit, which is still played today, basically what it does is you banish a water monster and then you can special summon this. It's a level 4. Basically it's an easy and clear free summon that you can do, and then you can do whatever combos you want. Rank 4s, go into Vomit Shark, go into Totally Awesome, stuff like that, extend into Synchros. These cards are very important, and this is the first time that we saw kind of banish to summon monsters. This would really sort of set a precedent in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because just generally it's very important. That's something that continued and continued and continued in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just that whole banish to, that entire banish to special summon motif would just continue throughout the years. To this day, we get chaos monsters, monsters all the time that banish 3 of this archetype to special summon this monster. So this was actually the first appearance of banish to summon monsters. Labyrinth of Nightmare, I think, would fairly be placed somewhere around here in B tier. Again, all of these early sets are actually really, really good. The best sets in Yu-Gi-Oh! Were actually some of the earlier ones, just because you didn't have a lot of misses. You had a lot of hits and not a lot of misses. Only because they didn't really... You had a lot of hits and not a lot of misses because the game was so slow that even if you released a somewhat good card, it would have a huge impact. And to this day, a lot of these cards are either banned and have tons of impact. Next, we have Legacy of Darkness. Legacy of Darkness was another interesting one. Yatagarasu was in there. Injection Fairy Lily, these were both on the ban list. Yatagarasu was banned totally. Injection Fairy Lily was limited to one for a very, very long time. You could actually summon it off of Giant Rat, and then you would just have like a 3,000 attack beater on the field. It's like totally insane. R Knight Parashath was like one of the best higher level monsters in the game at the time, kind of along with Jinzo, because every time you did piercing, this card did piercing. It was only 1900 attack in level 5, but it did piercing. When you did damage, it let you draw, which kind of helped you get advantage. Also, it was light, so you could always use it for banishing stuff later down the line. Tyrant Dragon was really a flop. Fiber Jar was another insane card. Totally resets the game. Last Turn was another card that was just incredibly annoying with Jowgen the Spiritualist. That deck came out around this time just because you could normal summon Jowgen, get your life points down, activate last turn, and then your opponent will have to special summon from the deck, but they can't because there's a Jowgen on the field, and they can't special summon, so you automatically win. This was actually, I failed to mention, the first appearance of spirit monsters, which have had a huge impact on the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years. There have been so many good spirit monsters. Yatagarasu was kind of like the first big one, but later down the line there are tons of different ones. The most recently good one was Amato Iwata, which basically turns off all monster effects. They would eventually get several different archetypes. Yeah, generally, like, spirit monsters have had a huge meta impact over the years, for sure. So, yeah, they were incredibly important. Azura's Priest was another good one. Creature Swap, Exile Force. We've got some Metamorphosis targets. Of course, we don't have Metamorphosis yet, but I assure you it's coming. Dark Baltier, Dark Ruler, Hades was just kind of like, okay. Fiend Skull Dragon, Royal Oppression was one of the most insane cards ever. Either player could pay 800 life points to negate the special summon of a monster, which is just kind of like incredible, because you could set up a full board, set this, flip it on your opponent's turn, and just continuously pay 800 every time your opponent attempts to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's completely unfair card. Reinforcements of the Army is another one. Lets you search Warrior. Incredibly generic. Has been on the limited list forever. And I don't think it's moving anytime soon, despite being all types of rarity bumped in all types of ways. Twin-headed Behemoth comes back. Amazing card. Bottomless was actually a rare, huge rare, because it banishes any big monster that's summoned, so you can banish things like BLS. This is another one that even to this day, Trap Trick decks still play this card. It's a really, really good trap. The problem with grading some of the older sets, though, is that a lot of the really good cards are actually banned. Now, in terms of kind of like competitive impact over the years, this set was huge. Like, all the cards in this set were huge in like 2005. But a lot of these cards in here are actually not even competitively impactful today. I think the only ones that would probably be like Reinforcements of the Army and Royal Oppression. A lot of these cards, Smoke Grenade was in here too. But a lot of these cards are actually, if they like, they're, even if Yatagarasu was unbanned today, it would probably have no meta impact. Nobody would play it. Injection Fairy Lilies at 3, nobody plays it. But yeah, I think at the time it was actually a very good, very, very good deck. Very good set. I'd say it's probably somewhere in this like B tier area right here. I don't think it's better than Labyrinth of Nightmare. It's probably somewhere in this B tier area right here. We're forming a bit of an L shape here. I'm not liking that too much. But next we've got Pharaonic Guardian. Tons of good cards. Played to this day. A Ring of Destruction, very, very good. Spot Removal helped you end games. Lava Golem was another really, really good card. Just because... Actually, yeah, Lava Golem was another good card. Lets you tribute 2, non-targeting removal of 2 monsters, and it burns for 1,000. Also helps you end games. Trap Dust Shoot would still be played today if it was still legal. Metamorphosis, if it was still legal, would be played today. Metamorphosis is absolutely insane. It's one of like the most broken cards ever printed. You basically tribute a monster, you summon a fusion monster with the same levels from your extra deck. It's not a real fusion summon like instant fusion is, but it's still like really broken, because you could tribute a level 1 monster or a level 1 token like Scapegoats, and then you could just and then you can make a free Thousand Eyes Restrict without even having to play any of the fusion monsters. Totally like insane card. I don't think that it would be that crazy if it was legal today. because there's not like a ton of monsters to summon with it. But it's still a very, very good card. It was good for years, banned almost immediately. King Tiger Wang Hu was a card that was very good as a side deck card at the time. Nightmare Wheel, another good like burn card. Guardian Sphinx, crazy effect, returns all monsters. And Mirage of Nightmare, another really, really, really insane spell. Lets you draw during your opponent's standby phase and then discard that same number of cards. Basically lets you draw 4 cards and then discard during your standby phase. Like, really good. This card today would be crazy. Because you could set up your board, activate Mirage of Nightmare, end your turn, and then during your opponent's standby phase, you draw 4 additional cards. Very good chance of you drawing into hand traps, and then basically you have set up your full board, and you probably drew like 2-3 hand traps. Like, it would be insane today. Also, this is the release of one of the first archetypes of Yu-Gi-Oh, which is the Gravekeepers. This deck has been in and out of the meta for so long. Like, seriously, this is one of those like legacy archetypes that has been in the meta forever. It's a really, really, really good deck. It has been like super competitive, where it's been like topping events. It's been a rogue deck. It's been kind of all over the place, but immediately it saw competitive impact. Gravekeeper Spy is a crazy good card. It was a 2000 defense flip effect monster, which means your opponent was always going to take reflective damage, and then you would be able to special summon any Gravekeeper monster to your side of the field, and you could just summon another Gravekeeper Spy. It didn't have the new restrictions of except this card or except Gravekeeper Spy. You could literally your opponent could attack it to a Gravekeeper Spy, and then you could summon another Gravekeeper Spy off the one that they attacked into and weren't successfully able to summon. Necro Valley is one of the most broken cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, in terms of field spells, probably a top 5 field spell. Basically completely shuts down the graveyard for your opponent. Makes it very difficult to play. This card today is absolutely disgusting. The reason that people don't play it is because it would hurt their own decks if they did play it. But it's a really, really good card. Book of Moon, tons of competitive impact over the years. Recently, it was good against Colossus. Thunder Dragon Colossus, because your opponent make like 2 Colossus and you could just book them, and then their effects would basically turn off, because it was kind of like a non-targeting, it was kind of like a non-destruction way to deal with Colossus. Needle Sealing is another one, still good in trap decks today. Needle Sealing and Solemn Strike basically outs any board in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because there's really nothing that they can do, because you can't respond to a counter trap. Yeah, tons of really good competitive value. Book of Life for zombie decks, Spirit Reaper for not just zombie decks, but decks all around. This set, I think, is actually sort of underrated in a lot of ways. Dark Room of Nightmare is really, really good. Reasoning to this day is still limited to this day. Reckless Greed is another insane card. Yeah, I think this set is actually really good. Just in terms of not only it was like really good when it came out, but it has had so much lasting impact over the years. I think this set is somewhere around A tier. I don't think it's quite as good as Metal Raiders, because it has way too many like good monster searchers, and Spell Ruler is just insane. I definitely think it's somewhere around there. All right, next on the list is Magician's Force. This set is kind of like in the middle for me. So it has a lot of legacy cards. Like, it was a lot of like, as I would call them, there's a lot of fan cards in here, like Dark Magician Girl. Dark Magician Girl is a very popular card, but in terms of meta impact, it really didn't have that much. Dark Paladin was actually a really good card, but the issue with him is he had to be fusion summoned. You couldn't use Metamorphosis on Dark Paladin, which made him kind of less good. XY, the Dragon Cannon, stuff like that. Again, this is another card that you had to contact fuse. It was cool that it was the first contact fusion, because that would kind of like later down the line would allow you to do a ton of different, it would basically allow Yu-Gi-Oh! To cheat around fusion monsters. It would kind of make the way for Gladiator Beast, make the way for really, really important decks down the line. So it was kind of like a cool thing to start. Breaker the Magical Warrior was a very good monster. Tribe Infecting was good. I never liked Paladin of White, very slow way to summon a Blue Eyes. Skilled Dark Magician, very slow way of summoning a Dark Magician. Wave Motion, huge meta impact. Spell Canceller, huge meta impact. The both of them. This was one of the best burn cards ever made. It was used as recently as Mystic Mind formats. Very, very good for that. Spell Canceller was another card that it's kind of like Jinzo. The issue with this card, what makes it suck is that it's it has the same effect as Jinzo, where it negates all spells. But the issue with this card is that its stats are just so trash. Like it really does. It has 1600 defense and 1800 attack, which makes it unsearchable by both Sangan and unsearchable by Witch of the Black Forest. In addition to that, its attack is just abysmal. Like 1800 is very low. You had 1900 attack normal monsters running around at this time, so it's very easy to out this monster. I don't know why this monster didn't have the stats of Jinzo. Rivalry actually has had meta impact over the years. Very recently in like Zombie World and various other decks. It's actually, for a long time, this card actually didn't see any meta play. But recently it's come back. The thing that ruins this set is actually like the collector's cards. It's actually not there's some decent cards in here, but for the most part, there's a lot of collector's cards in here. Magical Merchant's always been good. Secret Barrel's one of the best burn cards of all time. And Kaiser Colosseum, very annoying to deal with. Thunder of the Ruler is like another Wabaku, basically. It prevents attacks. It's like another Threatening Roar / Wabaku. It's in that sort of group. But this was the first time that we really saw kind of like anime monsters get some support in terms of Dark Magician and Blue Eyes. They both got some support in this set in the form of various cards. Unfortunately, it wasn't that great, so Dark Magician wasn't a competitive deck, and neither was Blue Eyes. After this, Magical Scientist is another insane card. This set, like I said, this has a lot of like good cards sprinkled in throughout. But for the most part, this set is a little it's kind of overwhelming. It's kind of underwhelming. They've got a lot of like good cards, but they've put the focus really onto printing cards out of the TV show for this one. So honestly, I'd probably put this bottom of B. I know this seems like every Yu-Gi-Oh set was good at this time, but like at this time they really were really, really good. Don't worry, we'll have tons of terrible sets later down the line. So next we've got Dark Crysis. This is one of the sets that just quite isn't that great. You've got a few cards that are decent, like Vampire Lord, because it could be summoned off of UFO Turtle. Skill Drain, still one of the best floodgates of all time. Reflect Balancer, another card that your opponent attacks, it basically reflects back at them the damage. So pretty good. Shinato the Arc basically sucked. This was the first release of the I forget what these cards, the Guardian monsters, which is another kind of like new archetype. Most of them were really, really difficult to summon and just absolutely terrible, with the exception of Butterfly Dagger Emma, which was a spell that basically added itself back. Tsukiyomi did have meta impact, so did DD Warrior Lady. This is not like the strongest set. So honestly, there's not a lot of cards that have had long-term or short-term meta impact. Exodia Necros totally flopped. It was not at all like it was in the show. It's actually very, very, very easy to beat. It's completely not the same thing. I wish they would give this card a retrain. I think the idea is really cool to put the Exodia pieces in your graveyard and get this cool monster onto the field. But long term, it was just a atrocious flop. This is not a good card whatsoever. So overall, we've had like Vampire Lord, Skill Drain, DD Warrior Lady, Butterfly Dagger Emma, and Final Countdown is pretty much it. This set was pretty empty in terms of just good cards. There are a lot of terrible, terrible cards in this. This is one of those old packs that's just kind of like... it really didn't live up to the hype, unfortunately. There are a lot better sets than this set. I'm just double checking the second page. Yeah, nothing too crazy. Ojama Green, that's serious stuff. Archfiend Soldier, again with Gemini Alpha out there, it was just kind of like another one added to the list. Yeah, the rest is just kind of not that great. Dragdown actually saw some meta impact over the years. This is actually our first like C tier, maybe even D tier. It was like there was like 5 decent cards. With the exception of like Skill Drain, this set really didn't have a lot of long-term meta impact. But I'd say it's still kind of like a decent pack. Yeah, I'd say, yeah, C tier is probably like a fair, like, okay, has a few good cards in it, but nothing too crazy. I guarantee you there will be F&Ds later down the line. But next, you've got Invasion of Chaos. I already know where this is going to go. I don't even have to say much. This set just made such a huge, like, power jump in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh jumped from um, Yu-Gi-Oh made such a huge leap in terms of competitiveness after this set came out. It's absolutely insane. There's so many like crazy monsters. All you had to do was ban it. So right off the bat, we have BLS and Chaos Emperor Dragon. All you had to do to summon these was banish two monsters, one light, one dark, and you had a 3,000 attack monster on the field. Before this, there was nothing like that going on. Um, the best that you basically had was like a Jinzo. But then these two came out. It was absolutely insane. All you needed was a light and a dark, and you summoned it. That would have been crazy enough. But these two have some insane effects. Chaos Emperor Dragon has an effect where you can pay 1,000 life points and then send all cards from the field and in both players' hands to the graveyard and inflict 300 to your opponent for every card sent to the graveyard. That effect is insane. You can end games with that. But that actually opened up your opponent. It actually opened up to something called a Yada Lock, where you can have, if you had a Sangan on the field and a Chaos Emperor, you can summon Chaos Emperor, activate its effects, send everything to the graveyard, activate the Sangan, add a Yatagarasu, attack your opponent directly. They have no cards in their hand or on the field. Attack them for 300, now they can't draw, and you just keep eternally doing this until your opponent couldn't draw any more cards. This wasn't exactly the most consistent thing at the time. A lot of people kind of talk it up more than it has to be, but still, it was like a totally broken and insane thing to happen. Yeah, Chaos Emperor Dragon was absolutely insane. Blackluster Soldier, another one. Like, Chaos Emperor Dragon with its existing effect today, easily be played in tons of different decks. It's just completely broken. It's a good thing it got eroded. I mean, it could not exist in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today with its old effect. Blackluster Soldier was another, like, amazing boss monster. Could attack twice on monsters. It can banish a monster, even face down monsters. This card was just really good on offense, on defense, against a lot of different decks. Dimensional Fusion is another broken card. Opened up. This is another card that can never come back. You pay 2,000 life points and then special summon every banished card, every banished monster you have in the graveyard, and your opponent could do the same. But if you're going first, that doesn't matter because they haven't banished anything. So this card is just absolutely nuts. Dark Magician of Chaos. Another broken card. It lets you add back any spell in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Back to your hand. It's not once per turn. Any monster it destroys gets banished. Just absolutely insane. Leviathan Dragon is important because Umi decks would sort of come up soon after this with the structure deck coming out. These don't count, by the way. The Ring of Destruction, Lava Golem, they were special edition cards in this too, Magic Cylinder. None of those count. Manju, still one of the best ways to search a ritual spell in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Still really, really important. Manticore of Darkness. You can create an endless loop with this card. And card of safe return to draw out all the Exodia pieces. Grand Manju, huge meta impact. Even today, it's still played. It's one of the best rogue decks to ever be printed into the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because it never seems to die and it never seems to get hit on the ban list. It's always good, but not good enough to get hit, and therefore it kind of lingers eternally in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, definitely very good. Next, on this next page, again, more cards. Stumbling. Decent stun card. Heart of the Underdog lets you draw stuff if you get normal monsters endlessly. Compulsory actually came out in this set. Chaos Sorcerer, I forgot, one of the greatest commons ever printed. This was yet another monster that you can summon by banishing a light in the dark. Incredibly easy to summon, and then when you summon it, it lets you banish a monster. Just like, you can't come up with this stuff. Self-destruct button was super annoying. Stealth Bird, one of the best burn cards ever. And I think that's pretty much it in terms of the good cards. I'm going to double check here. Yeah, we've got stuff like Curse of Darkness, Salvage. Yeah, still, even on page 3, there's still usable cards. Overall, this set is really, really sick. I think this is an S tier set. Like I said, it didn't just like slightly change the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It really changed the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Ton of cards from the set got banned. Tons of cards needed to be eroded. Easily out of all of these sets, this set has the best monsters. This set has the best spells, and this set has the best monsters out of the ones we've seen so far. The difference with Magic Ruler, it literally has the best spells of all time. I don't know if Invasion of Chaos has the best monsters of all time, but Definitely huge power boost to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! After the Invasion of Chaos. Next, we've got Ancient Sanctuary. This set is actually not that big. This is actually probably our first D tier set. You've got Enemy Controller, which is basically like Change of Heart was banned, and this was kind of like another kind of Change of Heart. You could tribute a monster, take your opponent's monster until the end phase. Also, it could change battle position. It had 2 effects on 1 card, so it was like a half decent card. But Brain Control would just come out later and power creep this card. The good thing about this is that it had 2 monsters. 2 effects, basically. Then we have the Archlord cards, which is kind of like a new sort of, not an archetype, but it's kind of like a small, like 3-card archetype sort of thing. But we've got the Sanctuary in the Sky and its entire archetype. We have our first, like, huge not our first real huge archetype, but one of the bigger huge archetypes, which is the Agents. The Agents actually came out in this set. Unfortunately, most of them were not very good at the time. It was actually kind of a lackluster deck. Eventually, it would go on to win a world championship, a Yu-Gi-Oh! World Champion, which is a world championship, which is obviously huge meta impact there. But when it came out, the Agents kind of just flopped. Knight Assailant was a very good card. It could help you loop flip effect monsters from the graveyard. Emissary of the Afterlife is another really good card, because basically it let you search Exodia pieces when it was sent to the graveyard. King of the Swamps was another card that was let you search polymerization very easily, and it counted as a material for fusion. But outside of like the very few cards that I've mentioned, this set was really kind of a flop. As you can see, the rest of these cards are kind of like just worse versions of existing cards. Like this is just a worse Blue Eyes. Mystic Shine Balls are actually pretty good, and they're somewhat usable today. But for the most part, a lot of not so great cards. Solar Flare Dragon was okay in burn decks. But yeah, we're already on page 2, and there's like 1 good card. Yeah, I think this is fair. This is probably our first D tier set. The only thing that's keeping this from F tier is the fact that the Agents came out in this, and they would eventually have some serious meta impact. But at this time, I mean, it had like virtually no meta impact. This set was really kind of like the first flop where like it came out. I remember when it came out, I was like, like I don't really even want to buy this. Like, it's not even that great. So that's our first D tier. All right, next we've got the 2 movie packs. This is a bit confusing because technically they both came out at the exact same time. But basically, this came out in the movie. So when you went to go see the Yu-Gi-Oh! I forget what the movie's called. Basically, the Yu-Gi-Oh! The first movie, I forget what the exact name is. When you saw the movie, when you got into the movie theater, they gave you this pack. Yeah, so what this basically included was 1 of 4 cards. Pyramid of Light, which is just restrictions on the card, which is when it's destroyed, you destroy Sphinx Talea and Sphinx, and the other Sphinx. I forget his name. Andro Sphinx, Talea Sphinx, and then basically lets you summon Theonin. But yeah, this card's not that great. The Sphinxes were never really that good of a deck to play. Cool collector's cards, cool from the movie stuff, not that good. Shining Dragon, another card that is just very, very, very difficult to summon, and not really worth summoning. It basically can't be targeted, which doesn't mean much in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because there's so much non-targeting removal and just general destruction. It doesn't even matter. It gains 300 for every dragon in the graveyard, which you're going to have a lot because you have to tribute a Blue Eyes Ultimate to summon it. But regardless of that, it's very difficult to summon, not worth summoning, basically. Sorcerer of Dark Magic's kind of like a decent card, but again, pretty not easy to summon. You have to tribute 2. I think it's like level 6 or higher spellcasters to summon it. It can negate a trap, which is again not really that huge of a deal unless you're playing like this card isn't even that difficult to summon. Blue Eye Shining Dragon is way more difficult to summon the Sorcerer of Dark Magic, but still not worth playing. Waterpond's kind of like, it came out, it was an interesting card. If it's added, you can special summon it. If it's added to your hand, you can special summon it. Like a decent cool effect, level 1 fairy, stuff like that. If you search it off a thing and you can summon it for free. It's like a light monster, but overall, I don't think that this card is particularly all that great, along with some of these others. So I'd say probably this is our first F tier. It just really was not that great of a set. Next, we've got exclusive pack. Now, this is a weird situation. You had the movie pack, which I just showed you. You have to go to the movie theater to buy it. And then Konami actually made something called the exclusive pack, which is cards from the movie, but you didn't get in the movie pack. You had to actually go to a store and buy them. And this set is terrible as a kid. I remember I bought like 3 of these expecting to get all these different cards. They always come with the exact same cards. They always come with the same 8 Yu-Gi-Oh pack. They always come with the same 8 Yu-Gi-Oh cards every single time. Every time you buy this set, every time you buy this pack, it always comes with the same cards. Now this one actually had some decent meta impact, just because of Return from the Different Dimension. That is basically it. Andro Sphinx was never good. Familiar Knight was pretty slow, and it lets your opponent special summon. Theanin to Sphinx to Leia. This was hard to summon. It was decent effect, but it's hard to summon. Rare Metal Dragon can't be normal summoned. Penta the Dark Clown misses timing. Inferno Tempest is one big disaster. Basically, if you take 3,000 damage in one attack, you banish all, I think, of all monsters in your deck, which is cool if your opponent attacks you with exactly 3,000 or more. But if they attack you with a bunch of 19 hitters, then it just does nothing. It's a dead card. But Return from the Different Dimension is actually one of those broken cards ever. You basically flip, pay half your life points, special summon all of the banished monsters you have. And that is just absolutely broken, because you could basically OTK immediately that turn. You could tribute stuff. You could metamorphosis them away. It basically gives you a ton of resources in a pinch at the cost of half your life points. And the great thing about paying half your life points is you always have half your life points. Half your life points is, you could have 50 life points, you have half your life points. You have 10 life points, you have half your life points. But yeah, this thing is one of the most broken cards that has ever been printed, still banned today. Other than that, the other 7 cards are pretty much useless, so I'd probably put this into D tier, but it's definitely better than the F tier, which has virtually no good cards. So next we're moving on to Soul of the Duelist. This is a set that personally I like to open, but again, I have to stay objective here. This set actually kind of sucked. The only card that I can see here that has had meta impact, this is actually the first release of level monsters. One of the most interesting summoning mechanics in Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically, every single turn, your monster levels up, kind of like a Pokemon, and you get a bigger monster. The problem with this is it's extremely slow. It's very slow. It's just, and on top of it being slow, to level up your monster every single turn, they put all types of like various restrictions, like your monster has to be flipped, and then if it survives that flip, you can level it up, or it has to destroy a monster by battle, and then it can flip. It has to do it during your standby phase, so you have to leave it to survive an entire standby phase. Very, very problematic for that reason. A lot of them were just complete flops. Horus is an insane card. It's a Horus the Black Flame Dragon, level 8, is a once per turn spell negate. That is just eternal. You can just keep using it if you want to. I'm pretty sure it's like a mandatory spell negate. It's a very good card, but it's very difficult to summon it. It's just like, I wish they would make this an easier card to summon, because I really like the card personally. Mystic Swordsman level 2 is a cool card. This one was actually meta relevant. Mobius was meta relevant. This is, I'm pretty sure, the first Monarchs came out in Soul of the Duelist, so I guess that's one of the positives there. More kind of metamorphosis targets that were nearly impossible to summon, and we're already like pretty much that's pretty much it. That's almost all of the good cards in this set, which was basically Mystic Swordsman level 2, which hasn't seen meta relevance since like 2006, and Mobius, which also has not seen any meta relevance for over a decade easily. So like I said, this set just is kind of like, it's cool that Monarchs and Levels came out in this set, but it's just, and Monarchs actually did go on to become a very, very, very good deck. Levels still kind of to this day suck. There aren't a lot of staples in this set. Again, the only thing that's keeping me from putting this set into F tier is the fact that there are Monarchs kind of had their like first appearance in here, and they went on to be really, really good eventually one day. But at the time, this set had, with the exception of really Mobius, very little meta impact. Next, we've got Rise of the Duelists. Another set. I like this set. I opened a ton of this when it came out. But if we're going to look at it objectively, not a ton of really insane cards. Thestalos, good. Monarch, solid. Uh, Creator was a card that was like hyped up. I remember when it was coming up, it was really hyped up, but it's kind of difficult to summon because you can't special summon it from the graveyard. It's a level 8, and there weren't a lot of ways to special summon this without special summoning it from the graveyard. But it does. It has a cool effect where you can target a monster in the graveyard and then discard a card, special summon it. It's a cool effect. Monster Reincarnation is another cool card. Basically lets you get resources back. Machine Duplication obviously has had a lot of meta impact over the years. It was used in Spirals when they first came out, and it was used in... it's been used in Cyber Dragons for like decades. Also, it's been in... what's that thing? Desk bots. Just any kind of like low attack machines, Morphtronics, stuff like that. So it's kind of like a decent card. Dekoichi is actually a really good card. This was used in what are they called? Skill drain decks. Like there's a lot of like decent cards throughout the set, but there's nothing like game breaking in this set. There was no like Mirror Force. There was no Raigeki. There was no Pot of Greed. There was nothing like there's no Painful Choice. Like all of the cards are just kind of just okay. Yeah, just overall, this is a very like just okay set. There's nothing too insane in here, and that's kind of it's honestly what is holding this set back. Just as a generality, is that there's nothing too broken. There is some more level monsters, which again, like I said, were sort of a flop, and now we're kind of getting into the non-ultimate rare territory and the cards that are just not great. But yeah, I'd say Rise of the Duelist is probably like, I think a fair place to put it is probably like C tier. It had some decent staples. It definitely had more like individually good cards than these three on impact. But these maybe had more long-term like competitive value to them. But it definitely had like a lot of, this set definitely had like a lot of decent cards in it. That had like immediate meta impact. They just weren't crazy. Like Koichi was good because it puts darks in graves, draws cards. Creator was good. Like it has a lot of decent cards. Actually, Divine Wrath was kind of good. It negates monster effects. Serial Spell made decks that relied on FTKing a lot more consistent. So I think that's probably like a C tier is probably like a fair place to put Rise of Destiny. All right, next we've got Flaming Eternity, Flaming Eternity. This is another set that I'd say is just okay. It's not like super crazy, but it's just okay. It's got some good cards. We've got Lightning Vortex, which at the time when it came out, Raigeki was banned. Today, Lightning Vortex is totally useless. Gatling Dragon is actually a really good card for Metamorphosis. Same with King Dragoon. Was a decent card for Metamorphosis. King Dragoon actually saw recent meta play with Guard Dragons when, well, not recent, maybe like a year or two ago, when Argo Pain was still legal. Sacred Phoenix has an entire archetype devoted to it. Phoenix Winglash is a good card because it puts a card on your opponent's deck. One of the best forms of removal is to put a card onto your opponent's deck. If they summon it, if they summon like an Air Knight Parshath, you activate Phoenix Wingblast, put it on top of their deck, and now you basically have forced them into a brick. Deck Devastation Virus is a card that, this is the first virus that we got instant meta impact, instantly really good. Great in skill drain decks because you can summon big dark monsters, activate skill drain, stuff like Foolister. Basically, you could summon it and then tribute it and then destroy every card that your opponent has in their hand with 1500 or less attack. So definitely a very good card there. More Monarchs. Rock Monarch was kind of not so great. It destroyed face down cards. Blast Magician was not great at all. Feather of the Phoenix was another card like Phoenix Wing Blast, but instead of being on a trap, it was on a spell, which had both its like benefits and detriments. Rescue Cat, huge meta impact over the years. It was banned, it was unbanned, it came back. It was a lot of controversy around Rescue Cat. Today, it's actually still used in Tri Brigade, and now that we've had a recent ban list, they might actually make another comeback in the deck here. So this is definitely a set that's had some long-standing impact, some good cards at the time of release. It's definitely not. It's kind of like a sleeper set. It's got a few really really powerful cards, and then it's got, for the most part, kind of like junk. But it definitely did have a few really strong cards in it, with stuff like lightning vortex, deck devastation, Phoenix Wing Blast. It definitely has some really serious good stuff, and of course Rescue Cat. So it's probably got like 5, 6 really good cards, and then for the most part, it's kind of like a weaker set. I'd say this is probably, I'd probably feel comfortable putting it around. I'll put it above Dark Crisis, right around C tier here. It's not in the upper echelon, but I think C tier is like a fair place to put it.